Why was Moses' body never found? This is one of the questions that defies time and has been debated for centuries. The mystery behind Moses' story transcends what was revealed in the Bible. There are secrets and truths that remain hidden, at least until today. In this video, we will explore the narrative of Moses and all the mysteries surrounding this intriguing and miraculous character. Moses stands as one of the most notable protagonists in the entire Bible and perhaps in all of human history. His actions and words left an indelible mark on history in a profoundly positive way. Chosen by God to emancipate the Hebrew people from slavery in Egypt, guide them to the promised land of Canaan, and teach them divine law, Moses played a crucial role. His story is meticulously recorded in the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, with a focus on Exodus, the second book of Moses, covering his birth, prophetic calling, and the liberation of the children of Israel from Egypt. Exodus narrates an incredible saga, the greatest escape in history, in which more than 2 million slaves fled from one of the most fortified nations in the world. This narrative is filled with miracles, including the most renowned ones in the sacred book. Leading this historic moment was Moses, a man who witnessed more miracles than Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob combined. In addition to the miracles that occurred when God intervened on behalf of his people, some of these events may seem magical, such as the transformation of Moses' staff into a serpent. However, most of these events were clearly a manifestation of divine power over creation for the benefit of his people. Moses' journey is filled with examples like these. Let's delve into the details of Moses' entire journey until his death. Moses was born in a challenging period for his people, the Israelites, who had lived in Egypt for centuries. Initially settled there during the rule of Joseph, an ancestor of Moses who had been governor of Egypt, the Israelites went from a privileged life to slavery under the rule of the Egyptian pharaohs. To face this challenge, the pharaoh ordered the massacre of all Israelite children, fearing the rapid growth of the population. Moses' family was determined to save him from death. Initially, they hid him, but soon they realized the need for a different plan. Moses remained hidden for 3 months, and when they could no longer keep him a secret, his mother placed him in a papyrus basket and hid him among the reeds at the banks of the Nile, while his sister watched from afar. The child was found by the daughter of Pharaoh Ramses II, who was bathing in the river. The sister of the child offered to find a nurse for him, and his own mother was chosen to nurse him. After growing up, the young man was returned to Pharaoh's daughter, who called him Moses and raised him as a noble in a prosperous environment. Thanks to this dramatic situation, the son of an Israelite slave was raised as a prince in Egypt. Despite his status and luxurious lifestyle, Moses always maintained a connection to his roots and sympathized with his enslaved Israelite compatriots. Before we continue, tell me, are you enjoying the story and would you like to discover more mysteries of the Bible? If the answer is yes, subscribe to the channel to receive all the stories and secrets of the Bible. Time passed. Moses became an adult, and one day he witnessed an Egyptian brutally mistreating a Hebrew slave. Outraged by this injustice and cruelty, Moses took control of the situation and, thinking no one was watching, killed the Egyptian and buried the body in the sand to hide the evidence. The next day, while Moses was out again, he witnessed 2 Hebrew slaves fighting each other. Trying to intervene and separate them, one of them turned to Moses and asked if he planned to kill him as he had done with the Egyptian. Moses immediately realized that the news of his impulsive actions from the previous day had spread, and he feared for his life. It didn't take long for Pharaoh to retaliate against Moses for the murder of the Egyptian. Moses fled to the desert, becoming a fugitive from justice. Thus, Moses lived in the wilderness, in the land of Midian. After some time, 7 daughters of a prince and priest of Midian went to fetch water for their father's flocks, and in doing so were driven away by local shepherds. Moses intervened, driving away the shepherds and offering water to the women's flocks. Upon learning of his heroism, their father invited Moses for a meal and rewarded him with the hand of one of his daughters, Zipporah, in marriage. Moses reinvented himself as a shepherd, married Zipporah, started a family, and lived happily for many years. One day, while tending to his sheep, Moses noticed a burning and mysterious bush. God spoke through it, commanding Moses to leave his peaceful life in the desert, return to Egypt, and free the Israelites from slavery. The Lord revealed that he had witnessed the oppression of his people in Egypt, heard their cries before the taskmasters, and understood their suffering. In response, he decided to free them from the hands of the Egyptians, leading them to a fertile land flowing with milk and honey, the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. At the age of 80, Moses confronted Pharaoh, who refused to release the Israelites. Faced with Pharaoh's obstinacy, Moses unleashed 10 plagues upon Egypt. The water of the Nile turned into blood, an invasion of frogs, a plague of lice and flies, death of livestock, the emergence of boils, a hailstorm, a locust invasion, darkness, and finally, the death of all Egyptian firstborns. Only after these events did Pharaoh agree to release the Hebrews. As Moses led his people toward the Promised Land, Pharaoh changed his mind and ordered his troops to pursue them. However, Moses parted the waters of the Red Sea with his staff. Once the Israelites crossed, the sea closed, swallowing Pharaoh's forces. Upon reaching the foot of Mount Sinai, Moses ascended to the mountaintop and received the 2 tablets with the 10 commandments, along with a series of laws that began to govern relations among men. For 40 years, they wandered in the wilderness until the entire generation of slaves died, allowing only those born in freedom to enter the Promised Land. The Bible meticulously details the odyssey of the Israelites, events that would shape humanity for centuries. When Moses passed from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, on the summit of Pisgah facing Jericho, the Lord showed him all the land and said, "This is the land I promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I show it to you with your eyes, but you shall not enter it." Deuteronomy 34:4. Moses faced various trials in his leadership in the desert. The Israelites were an undisciplined and ungrateful group, often complaining despite repeated evidence of divine care for their needs. They needed clear and effective instructions. After a military victory over the Amalekites, they camped at the foot of Mount Sinai, where God delivered the 10 Commandments to Moses, written with his own finger on 2 stone tablets. While Moses was on the mountain, the Israelites made a golden calf statue to worship. Upon returning to the camp and witnessing the idolatrous behavior, Moses became furious, smashing the stone tablets with the 10 Commandments. Moses went up the mountain again to plead with God to forgive the Israelites. Following divine instructions, Moses had to carve new tablets with the 10 Commandments. He stayed on the mountain for 40 days, fasting, praying, and dialoguing with God. Upon finally descending from the mountain, the people were terrified because his face radiated the light of divine glory. Moses was an extraordinary leader, passing away while leading his people to the promised land of Canaan. Even today, Jews recognize him as the lawgiver of Israel. However, despite all his blessings, Moses' entry into the promised land was denied. You must be wondering why. In Deuteronomy 32, God explains the reason. Because you trespassed against my word in the wilderness of Zin when the congregation rebelled against me at the waters of Meribah. You did not hallow me in the midst of the children of Israel. Yet you shall see the land before you, though you shall not enter the land which I am giving to the children of Israel. God kept his promise and revealed to Moses the promised land, but he did not allow him to enter. The incident at the waters of Meribah is recorded in Numbers 20. Near the end of their 40 years of wandering, the Israelites reached the desert of Zin, where there was no water, and the community revolted against Moses and Aaron. They fell prostrate before God, and he instructed Moses and Aaron to gather the assembly and speak to the rock from which water would flow. Moses, angered, proclaimed before the assembly, "Hear now, you rebels, shall we bring water for you out of this rock?" Numbers 20:10. He then struck the rock twice with his staff, and water gushed out as God had promised. However, God immediately declared that due to their lack of faith and failure to honor his holiness, Moses and Aaron would not lead the children of Israel to the promised land. Verse 12. The punishment may seem severe, but upon closer examination of Moses' actions, several mistakes become evident. He disobeyed a direct order from God, who had instructed him to speak to the rock, but Moses struck it with his staff. Previously, in Exodus 17, God had instructed Moses to strike a rock to bring forth water, but the instructions varied here. God wanted Moses to trust him, especially after so many years of close relationship. Moses did not need to use force. His simple obedience to God and trust in the fulfillment of the divine promise were sufficient. Furthermore, Moses is credited with the act of bringing water, inquiring of the assembled people by the rock. "Shall we bring water for you out of this rock?" Numbers 20. Moses seemed to credit himself and Aaron with the miracle's merit, rather than attributing it to God. This public attribution of credit did not go unnoticed by God, who could not let such an act go unpunished, expecting the Israelites to understand divine holiness. The rock providing water is symbolized in 1 Corinthians 10 as Christ. The rock was struck in Exodus 17, just as Christ was crucified once, Hebrews 7. Moses' speech to the rock in Numbers 20 could be interpreted as a representation of prayer. Jesus was wounded once and continues to offer living water to those who pray in faith. However, when Moses struck the rock in anger, he compromised the biblical typology and indeed symbolized the crucifixion of Christ once again. The punishment imposed on Moses for his disobedience, pride, and misrepresentation of Christ's sacrifice was severe. He was prevented from entering the promised land, Numbers 20. Surprisingly, we do not witness Moses complaining about his punishment. Instead, he persisted in leading the people faithfully, honoring God in his holiness. In his compassion, God invited Moses to Mount Nebo, where he revealed to his beloved prophet the promised land before his passing, Deuteronomy 34. The account of Moses' death remains one of the great mysteries of the Bible. Although we know he died at the age of 120, his eyes did not weaken, and his strength did not fade. Moses was in his fullness when called to the celestial dwelling. He ascended Mount Nebo, an elevation of 4,500 feet, facing the challenges of old age with determination. Moses departed according to the word of the Lord, solitary but in peace. His tomb was situated in the valley of the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor, but to this day remains unknown. Moses is unique in the Bible, personally spared by God. This divine act of concealing his tomb prevented it from becoming a place of worship, preserving the mystery surrounding his never-found body.